Tell us about Protium, green hydrogen in the UK, and where you think we need to improve in project perception.
Pleasure to be on the show, Rob. Thanks very much for, or on the webinar. Thank you very much for having me. So Protium is a UK-focused green hydrogen energy company. We are client-focused, full value chain, and distributed in nature. So we build our dedicated upstream renewables. So we develop solar, wind, and other renewable electricity assets, and then downstream hydrogen production, with the intent and aim to help specific customers that have decarbonization goals for 2025 and 2030 to achieve those by building a wholly integrated set of energy infrastructure assets, and then packaging that into a multi-year offtake contract, a project we call a HESCO, or a Hydrogen Energy Services Company approach. We operate across the UK with a variety of different businesses, but our clients primarily fit into one of three buckets. So consumer-facing industrials, commercial transport users, so that includes road users, but also marine, and then the aviation sector as well. A company predominantly based in London, but with a team in Wales. We see green hydrogen in the UK as a really exciting opportunity. The UK has one of the richest resources for renewables, not only in terms of onshore wind, but also offshore wind, wave, tidal. And one of the big challenges that faces the UK, and faces indeed a number of other markets, is how do you integrate the enormous wealth of resource that we have in a way that is not just economically and from an engineering perspective the most efficient way, but how do you also do so in such a way that actually has the support of the public? Something that I think we don't talk really enough about more broadly in the energy transition is the need to make sure that the public are following us in this transitional story. And we've seen inside places like the United States that when groups have done deep studies on green hydrogen, they've noted that green hydrogen can materially increase the amount of variable renewables that a grid can absorb. And for countries like the UK that have large levels of curtailment at the moment, and just a number from the other year, UK curtailed 4 gigawatt hours of wind, £300 million paid out from the British taxpayer for curtailment last year, rising from 10 million a decade ago. And those trends are going to continue until we can find more efficient ways to absorb renewables into that grid. And we also then need to think about these larger scale projects, these multi-gigawatt offshore wind projects. How do we build the infrastructure that allows us to absorb and tap into that wonderful resource that we have without building high voltage transmission lines and substations the whole way across the United Kingdom, which are likely to meet extensive public resistance from people who do not want massive high voltage transmission, that are very disruptive for cities that might require huge amounts of roads being teared up and rebuilt, and huge amounts of redesign work to homes that many consumers may fundamentally reject. And if we don't bring people along, and I think that is something that we miss, then we won't achieve the transition. And so maybe to finish with the question that you've really been asking in this webinar, which is how do we change perceptions? I think the biggest mistake we make in hydrogen is that we talk about price instead of value. If you want to understand the history of energy transitions in any technology, it's never to do with price. The early introduction of electricity inside the US, for example, was not safe. You usually had 2-3 deaths every single day. JP Morgan burned down his office twice because of electrical fires. It wasn't reliable. The systems frequently failed. It was wildly inefficient. The coal-fired power plants were 2% thermal efficient once you got the coal to the site. So it was negative efficiency by the time you run them. And because of that, they were very expensive. But electricity prevailed. And why? Because the alternative was gas lighting. And gas lighting flickered, it smelt, and actually had a whole bunch of other issues. Whereas electric lighting was clear lighting, it didn't have the smell, it was a signal of wealth and aspiration. And so as a result, people wanted it. And once you were able to get people engaged with the new potential of that technology, the new things that you could do with electricity compared to existing fuels, you were able to transform the market. And at that point, then cost started to become a material factor for the next wave of consumers. I think when we talk about green hydrogen today, we don't do enough to explain all the wonderful things that actually it can help to do. It can provide a non-toxic means of storage that actually is a gas that we've handled before, that doesn't require huge amounts of land, that if you were to use it in residential, it doesn't have carbon monoxide poisoning, as an example that people don't talk about. Or if you think about it in a road application like a truck or a bus, you have an air filter on every single fuel cell vehicle to create the oxygen that you need for the fuel cell process. So you have a mobile air purification device in your city. So a fleet of buses actually is cleaning the air, not simply zero emission, but actually removing particulate emission as it operates. These are the system benefits that green hydrogen can offer. These are the benefits we need to talk about. And this is how we will change perceptions around green hydrogen.